Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Step, step, step. Do you know how many steps your warehouse workers are taking a day? When your workers are walking, you're losing money. Endless trips to the printer or computer add up fast. Newcastle's mobile industrial carts with integrated power eliminate the walking to stationary printers and computers, keeping workers focused on high-value tasks, often doubling their output. Thousands of powered cart installations, including ones at the new warehouse's own micro-fulfillment center and in my previous jobs, prove that Newcastle customers get more done and save money. To learn more, head to newcastlesys.com. That's newcastlesys.com.
Today's warehouse needs to keep inventory moving smoothly and quickly. Meet these challenges with on-demand warehouse labeling from Brother Mobile Solutions. Our mobile and industrial printers will help optimize your operations to achieve the speed, reliability, and durability your warehouse needs. With easy integration for existing warehouse technology, convenient portability, and upfront affordability, Brother Mobile Solutions is at your side when it comes to warehouse labeling. Try one for free today by visiting brothermobilesolutions.com/newwarehouse or click the link in the show notes. That's brothermobilesolutions.com/newwarehouse to try one for free today.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. Today's episode, I am going to be joined by Joe Spisak. He is the CEO at Fulfill.com, and he is a 3PL guy. Comes from the world of 3PL and now offering great services for 3PLs as well. So we're going to talk to him a little bit about his journey to where he is now with Fulfill.com, how he kind of got into the marketplace of 3PLs, and also a little bit about, what does it look like in the landscape for 3PLs, especially like smaller 3PLs starting out in recent years and going into this year as well. So, Joe, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Happy Friday, man. Thanks again for having me. I've been following your guys' show for a while now, being the warehousing and logistics nerd that I am, and I love what you guys are doing, man. So thanks again for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I appreciate you listening, and definitely it's been great to get to know you over like the last month or two now. So really interested to hear about your story here. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background first, right? Because I think you didn't really come from a traditional fulfillment warehousing background, which I think probably a lot of us that work in warehousing don't, right? I don't think we like grow up and playing in the playground saying like, oh, let's play pretend warehouse on the jungle gym or something, right? So tell us about your background. You worked at AT&T for a while, but then you started your own 3PL ShipDaddy. So talk to us a little bit about that journey and how you kind of ended up with ShipDaddy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. You're absolutely right. I wasn't dreaming about picking and packing boxes growing up as a child, but it's the life I live now, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. So I'll kind of give you the abbreviated version, but I'll take it from the top. So sure. I was a D1 wrestler at the University of Virginia, and I ended up getting to stay an extra year there. I broke my shoulder. I got an injury red shirt, so I got my master's degree there. And once I graduated, I really went to school to focus on wrestling. Yeah. And although, I went to UVA, which is a great school, college doesn't necessarily prepare you for the entrepreneurial life. So laser focused on wrestling. I knew I always wanted to become an entrepreneur, but I didn't just flip the table and go zero cash flow and start the entrepreneurial journey right away. I got a work from home job, a great position at AT&T, where I could kind of ease into my entrepreneurial journey while still cash flowing on the side. So while I was at AT&T, I graduated in 2015. I was a network engineer and a systems engineer.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, I was pursuing my other passion of entrepreneurship, doing what I knew best, creating drinking games. So, I came out of college. I told you I was a wrestler, but what else I could do really well was play drinking games and party. So I kind of put together all of my passion. And over the course of a couple of years, I put together a product and brought this tabletop board game, this party game to market. And lots of trials and tribulations with that. But my dad, calls this and the other board games I've created my doctorate degree in e-commerce. So so that's what I spent doing over the course of a couple of years. And I got the games to a point where we were cash flowing enough that I could leave AT&T and start to pursue selling these games full time. And so Dicey was doing very well. We got on something called the Barstool Sports Big Brain Competition.
Okay.
And what the competition is it's basically what I call like a JV Shark Tank. So we pitched to Mike Rapoli. He's a billionaire that started Body Armor and Vitamin Water. Dave Portnoy, who owns Barstool Sports. Erica Nardini, who is their CEO at Barstool. And then John Taffer, the guy from Bar Rescue. And so we ended up getting some like pretty decent notoriety. We're shipping a couple thousand orders a month. Right around that time, we doubled down and started our next game called OK Boomer. It's a family trivia game. You can see we based this one off of my family. So there's me, my three sisters, mom, dad, grandma, cool. Grandpa. And, over the course of, since I started the games, we've done a little over $5 million in sales between these board games that, started out as a side hustle and ended up developing into a really great passive income for me. And the real win from it is that it got me into logistics and started in fulfillment. So
interesting.
When the game started to take off, we went through 3 different third-party logistics companies over the course of a year and a half. Okay. We worked with a couple of the big names in the space, not going to name any names, but we had all of the nightmare issues that you hear semi-frequently from brands working with a lot of these big guys, lack of pricing transparency, lack of communication and customer support, delayed shipments. A couple thousand orders a month between our brands, and we felt like just another cog in the wheel to some of these big players. And I was just so confused because I thought, is this the best that 3PLs have to offer in this space? Right. So, like most great businesses, they're created to solve a problem in the industry that isn't being solved at that time period. And so I brought everything back in house and I started my own fulfillment company called Ship Daddy, based out of central Pennsylvania, where my wife and I are from. So over the course of the next few years, I scaled Ship Daddy up to a 140,000 square foot building that I bought in central PA, ended up filling that up. And then I got to the point where I was ready to move on and go to my next business journey in the logistics space. And so I sold Ship Daddy back to my business partners and started fulfill.com. That's where we're at now.
Very interesting. And I got to know, before we go any further, pitching to John Taffer, Business Rescue. I mean, he's a pretty hardcore guy. Like, if you watch the show, right? I mean, how was that? Did he chew you up at all or anything?
Yeah. So great question. It's just such a hilarious experience looking back on that and seeing how far we've come. That was years and years and years ago, but we actually did really, really well. We crushed the presentation at the end. El Prez said that he would be interested in following up and investing in us. And it never went through, but we started to kind of pivot away from the games at that time period anyway. But no, we actually did really, really well. We were going into that like it was our Super Bowl, and I had all my numbers locked and loaded, ready to go. And the funny part about it was, going into that, we maybe had like 100 sales for our drinking game.
Really?
We just brought our product to market. We really did not have much to show for from a numbers perspective, but whenever opportunity arises like that, you you go and you duke it out in the arena and
yeah.
Exactly. See if you can generate some opportunity.
Yeah. Very interesting stuff. And it's certainly like an interesting journey, I think. And it kind of, I think, is very reflective of like what a lot of people are probably going through, right? Because even like with the pandemic as well, you see a lot of people trying to get into e-commerce and figure out, products to sell on e-commerce platforms and all those things. And it's interesting that you touched on, the 3PL market, and you were having trouble, getting like a real type of partnership, basically, right, is what you're saying. And I think that's an ongoing issue for a lot of people. Even just this week, I was talking to somebody else, and they were saying, they're having problems with their 3PL partner on the West Coast. And I think they said something like, sometimes they don't respond to them for like, it could be like a month, like there's no response. I mean, which is crazy, right? And you're thinking like, I have my inventory, I have my product with these people, like I'm trusting them to do, the things I need them to do. And it's a little crazy. So, with that 3PL market, I mean, there's so many, obviously there's huge players out there, right? But there's a lot of smaller 3PLs as well that are in the market and have been popping up more and more and growing like crazy in the last few years. So, I mean, with your perspective on where you are in the market, and I'm sure, with Fulfill.com, you talk to lots of 3PLs all the time. So how do you see the market kind of developing and evolving over this year and kind of going into the next year as well?
Yeah, great question. And that's kind of the $1 trillion question right now that everybody's, now that we're able to catch our breath from peak season being over, everyone's really looking around and trying to see what's the lay of the land right now and what's logistics going to look like in 2023. And I see a couple different trends, but here is just some high level predictions that I have. So I predict that as e-commerce starts to become more popularized across different sales channels. So it starts to expand outside of the realm of your Shopify, your Amazon.com, your Walmart.com. There's, we have customers that are selling on boutique marketplaces that you may never have even heard of, but they're super popular in their industry specifically. Yeah. But it's tough from a fulfillment perspective because not every 3PL or warehouse management system is able to integrate directly with these companies out of the box. So I think we're going to see a continued expansion in e-commerce brands looking to start getting on other marketplaces and platforms. And I think we're going to see an increased growth like we have been seeing in more boutique level fulfillment centers where, you see the big guys, and for the most part, anything outside of the realm of pulling your item off the shelf, sticking it in a box, slapping a label on it, and shipping it out, they really struggle with, or they're not going to even take on at all. So all of that considered, that opens up huge opportunities for these boutique level fulfillment centers that can hyper niche down and say, hey, we do fulfillment and we specialize doing it for Webflow e-commerce, or we specialize doing it for Good Morning America and the e-commerce back end that they're spinning up that we've had to fulfill for in the past. Just different examples like that. And as we start to see things like CPG companies and frozen fulfillment and stuff starting to increase all around from a direct-to-consumer perspective, I really think the big guys are at a disadvantage in that space. So I think we're going to see an increased pop-up in these boutique-level fulfillment centers jumping in to fill the demand of these niche fulfillment services that are needed. Yeah, very interesting.
And I see you post on LinkedIn, obviously, and you talk about that a lot. Like, what is your niche going to be? Like, you need to come in and find something like specific to focus on. And it's interesting too that you just mentioned, like, the big guys not necessarily like set up or poised to be able to take those like chunks of the market, right? So there's a lot of opportunity there. And I think that's like almost similar and relatable to other conversations I've had where, like, in the carrier market too, like parcel carriers like UPS and FedEx, like, they're kind of ripe for the market for a little bit of disruption, right? To figure out like kind of these smaller pockets of how do we, provide these different services that people are looking for and more tailored in a sense. So it was very interesting stuff. And I think, your perspective is really interesting because, you went through this journey. And I think a lot of people too, when they think about a 3PL or they want to, start a 3PL or something like that, they may be thinking like, oh, I'm going to have to get like a huge space, or I'm going to have to, how am I going to compete with like DHL or something out there, right? And that's like huge. But you didn't mention this in your little background story, but I know you said you worked it up to 140,000 square feet, but you started with a pretty small space, right? So tell us a little bit about that and how that kind of worked out for give some kind of like inspiration for people who maybe are thinking about getting into the 3PL game.
Yeah, so this is actually a hilarious story that I love telling people. Mm-hmm. So I bootstrapped this company. So I was up out of my mom's garage, and then once I basically got kicked out of the parents' house because they were tired of having so many pallets at their spot, and their house didn't make for the best receiving dock as well.
I can imagine.
It was just we were running around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to figure this thing out, right? So then I started doing some wheeling and dealing, and I ended up talking to a local real estate group who were family friends, and they needed some web design help. And so I told them, absolutely, like I can redo your guys' website for you. And they said, hey, in exchange for doing that, instead of paying you guys, would you want to move into one of our locations and you could use it for free in exchange for doing our web design?
Oh, wow.
I'm like, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, can't be too picky because they're giving it to me for free. But we ended up moving into like a 2,000 square foot abandoned morgue. So literally this used to be the location that the coroner used to store dead bodies in the caskets. And our racking was literally where the caskets used to be held. We would slide in our different games and our customers, and we didn't have air conditioning. We didn't have heat. We didn't even have a bathroom. So we were driving down the street to go into a gas station in order to go to the bathroom. And then lastly, we didn't have a truck dock, and we were like in the middle of our hometown. So we have these 53-foot trucks coming down our street and trying to back into this little morgue that doesn't have a truck dock. So we're just scrambling, just jumping on the truck and literally hand unloading everything. And the drivers were not happy because it just was super inefficient. So again, all learning lessons, but we were able to cash flow much faster because we were getting this free building. I was able to lock up a 6,000 square foot lease after that on a month-to-month basis, which was huge for us because I knew we would have the flexibility that once we filled that up, we weren't locked into some multi-year lease. And then we did such a good job of packing that 6,000 square foot location with our ideal customer profile, a lower SKU count and really high order volume, that we were able to make the jump of purchasing 140,000 square foot thing from a 6,000 square foot lease. So it was a pretty big risk there, and we were definitely on the clock to get cash flowing as soon as possible. But I mean, I think that just shows you how much damage you can do if you're signing the right customers in a limited amount of space. Yeah,
very interesting. And I wanted to touch on that because I want to talk a little bit about the challenges for 3PL startups. And I think I think you just kind of demystified that, I guess, in a sense, like is the challenge of, having enough space, right? And you're saying, you're running a 3PL out of 2,000, square feet. Or less, your parents' garage, right? So, I mean, it's totally possible to figure it out, and I think you kind of mentioned there with the ICP, right, and making sure that you have like the right brands and things that you can do with the space that you have. But talk to us a little bit about some of the additional potential challenges there would be for people who are thinking about starting a 3PL or have recently started a 3PL, and what are some of the challenges that maybe you faced or you see other people facing, and how they can kind of, navigate around those or work through those?
Yeah, all great questions there. So the toughest stage of growing your 3PL is 100% those early stages when you're trying to get your first couple customers. And it's tough for several reasons. So one, just from an economies of scale perspective, right? So you don't have the benefit of being able to order your packaging in bulk, to have great negotiated shipping carrier rates. off the get-go. To just really have an optimized operation where you can make more margin shipping per order, you're just not at that point yet. And the other thing that's difficult is, since you have less of a track record and you don't have that many customers signed, or any customers if you're just starting, is to be able to convince these early on customers to go with you guys when on paper you don't have a fulfillment track record. And once you do start to get a couple brands in and you can create those case studies, we talk about this all the time, how you want to use those brands and try and co-market through them and create these great case studies and let them sing your praises. Because what a lot of e-commerce brands have in their network is other e-commerce brands that they've been networking with as they've been growing on their journey. So great example of this is probably 7 out of 10 of our first customers at ShipDaddy were all in the, you guessed it, tabletop board game space. So we're able to, leverage this experience that we had and get super deep into our value-added services, where we could start to offer connections and value to these e-commerce brands that nobody could offer them, big or small 3PL. And for example, so, we had manufacturing connections overseas for our board games. We could split freight if they were at our manufacturer overseas and help to lessen the cost of shipments. We were able to share resources like marketing agencies and partners, things of that nature that, if you're with one of these big 3PLs, they're not going to be able to help you cut costs in these areas. They're not going to be able to help you push into big retailers. So as we're talking to retailers and presenting our games to these different B2B connections and wholesalers, we were able to say, hey, we have lots of game companies that we ship for. You should check these guys out as well. So whenever you can start to position that in your sales offering, these little guys are starting to look like the best option all around.
Interesting. And I think that kind of goes back to, what we were saying about, your experience, right? Starting out and not having like 3PLs really being partners for you, right? Which ultimately kind of pushed you to say like, oh, I'm going to do this myself and do it better, right? So, I think it's really interesting, the value of being able to create that partnership with a brand, like beyond just like box in, box out, right? You're able to provide them with more value through those things and those relationships, and really developing that. And I think on when you're on a smaller scale, it's easier to do that, like you guys did, like as you're kind of proving out here with your story. It just makes sense to create that partnership and be able to do that. And obviously, the network is a huge thing, like you said. So tell us a little bit about kind of how, this experience now, we talked like about your journey to start fulfill.com, but we haven't really talked about fulfill.com yet. So tell us about how, all this 3PL knowledge and crazy experience trying to get your own 3PL together and growing it to where you got it to, how that kind of led you to fulfill.com and what is fulfill.com.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you can see kind of the common themes in my journey up to this point. I kind of, with the e-commerce brands, I just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole and finding these problems, and saw people not solving them, or maybe not solving them well, and making the conscious decision to say, hey, it's time to make a pivot and push into these areas. And that was a big pivot for me, moving after I sold ShipDaddy to fulfill.com. And what I realized was while I was, back in the e-commerce brand stage and I was looking for these 3PLs, I brought a product to market. I can sell these products really well, but solving the logistics end of the puzzle is a completely different leg of the equation that I had no idea walking into, right? So you do what everybody does. You go to Google, you go to search engines, and you say, best fulfillment centers near me. And you get blanketed with the top 15 3PLs that are all Fortune 500 companies and have raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And everybody assumes that those are the best options when 95% of the time, it's actually quite the opposite. And they're not the best option for you from a quality perspective and a pricing perspective. So I realized that nobody out there right now is helping brands actually connect them with the proper logistics partner. And so having my e-commerce background and having my logistics background put me and my team in a really interesting spot where we understand both legs of the equation really well. So we can run the data on these e-commerce brands and then take that data and run it against the hundreds of warehouses on our network and shortlist the warehouses and present them back to the customer and give them direct introductions to warehouses that would be the best fit for them based off of all of the metrics that they're trying to hit. So fundamentally what we are a marketplace that connects e-commerce brands with fulfillment partners.
Interesting. And I think, obviously much needed because, I hear from, hearing your experience in the beginning of our conversation here, but, hearing from other people too about, just bad experiences they have with their 3PL. And I think sometimes, even like kind of going back to when I mentioned with the conversation I had earlier this week with somebody and, not getting a response for like up to a month it's a little crazy when you think about it and you think like, how can that be possible? Like, how can somebody stay in business when they're just like not responding to their customers or having that kind of communication? And some of that stuff, like you said, like if you just do a Google search and, you just go by like, oh, big name, or I've heard of this one before or something, like it doesn't mean, right, essentially they're the best, right? And especially, I think like as we talked about, you have their 3PLs that are focused on like certain types of product or certain types of marketplaces or things of that nature. And, you don't necessarily want to go with one that's not focused on that type of thing because they may not be able to handle it in the proper way. So I guess before we kind of close out here, looking from, I guess, turning it around now to the opposite side, like looking from a brand's perspective, what would you say that a company needs to ensure that they're getting or understanding from a 3PL before they select the one that they're going to go with or their ultimate choice out of the ones that they're looking at?
Yeah, great question. And so one, I'll say that's one of the reasons to come to logistics experts like us and have us do the vetting process and give you this short list. But still, you should, once we shortlist, you get intro to them, you talk to them directly, you can go tour their warehouses. We are looking to match brands with 3PLs that can act as a true extension of their business, not just another third-party partner where you end up in the scenario like you were talking about where a month goes by and the customer service is just clearly lacking. Yeah. But if I had to narrow it down to one thing to basically ask these 3PLs, it comes back to like the verticalization. And basically, do you have other brands that are very similar to us that you ship for at a high level? And you can make a lot of assumptions from that if they do have brands that are very similar to you. So, you can probably check the box that that they're getting good pricing for the weight of the units going out from a carrier rate perspective. Yeah. They're able to have good quality control if these brands have stuck around for any meaningful amount of time. If these brands are selling on the same sales channels as you're probably going to be able to sell on all of those sales channels. I think if we had to narrow it down to one thing, that's always one of the best things that you could ask. It just tells a lot and instantly lets you make some assumptions about how good the 3PL is with your given vertical.
Yeah, good advice. And I think that makes sense too. Like, you see, some of your not necessarily your competition, but similar, types of products, like you said, and even, from your experience, you said you're doing more board games, right? And it makes sense, right? They know how to ship this type of item, whereas like, you wouldn't go to somebody that's shipping, frozen fish to ship your lipsticks or something, right? That, right? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't match up. Like in a sense, warehousing logistics is, everything is like a box, right? But there are different details to how things are handled, especially when you look at the e-commerce experience, right?
Exactly. There's hundreds of different variables to consider. And that's where we come in and can punch all those numbers and do all the things that you wouldn't have even thought about. And I could talk about that all day, down to carrier pricing. So you'll have 3PLs that sure, they could technically take you on, integrate with their warehouse management system, do the shipping for you. But what if their best negotiated rates are for big and bulky and they have great UPS and FedEx rates, but we're shipping everything small parcel and we're looking for amazing DHL e-commerce rates where I can ship this 1.3 pound game for $5.15 anywhere in the country, as opposed to other 3PLs that we've worked with where they're shipping my game for $10, $11 and we sell it for $34.99 and it's like $6 difference on just the shipping costs. It's like, oh my gosh, that literally will make or break your growth in e-commerce.
Interesting insights, and it's really interesting. I think people can take a lot away from your experience and some of your growth pains, I guess, as I imagine you went through and trying to grow this and really learn from you. So it's great to see what you're building with Fulfill.com and not only just the resource itself of the marketplace and being able to connect, but I think the resource of just the knowledge that you're putting out there as well on LinkedIn and things like that. And I see, you have a guide coming out this morning you posted about as well. So it would be very interesting to see all that kind of stuff roll out, and really interesting to hear too your views as well on the market for 3PLs and how startups can kind of make it out and succeed in the giant world of 3PLs, right? So great to have you on the show, Joe. If people are interested to get in touch with you or learn more about Fulfill.com, I think obviously they can go to Fulfill.com, but maybe there's a more direct channel you would prefer.
Yeah, so Fulfill.com is our website. My email is joe@fulfill.com. And then my social media channels, I'm active on Twitter. My handle is @Joe Speezy, JoeSpeezy. And then LinkedIn as well, Joe Spisak, SPISAK. I tell everyone DMs are always open. I love talking shop. I love mentoring new 3PL owners. Like you just said, we're actually coming out first thing next week. We have a ridiculously comprehensive end-to-end walkthrough on how to start a warehousing and fulfillment company from scratch. Nice. And another course on how to profitably fill that up. So we're actually, I haven't told anybody this yet, but here's the big announcement. So we're starting exclusive announcement. We are starting a growth community for 3PL owners where we are going to be sharing all of our premium resources, courses, have folks on our team available to talk to people in real time and just share best practice all around. So we're going to be rolling that up over the course of the next 2 weeks. And then, so we're really excited about that as well. Kind of realize that there's just not great resources out there for people who want to start their 3PLs and grow their 3PL. So we're going to try and fill that need. Awesome.
That's great stuff. And definitely we'll be looking forward to that. And we'll put all the information at thenewwarehouse.com as well, so people can easily find it. So Joe, thank you once again for being on the show today.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.